Dwayne Tomah is a language keeper. He is the teacher of the Passamaquoddy language and culture. He is the youngest fluent speaker of the Passamaquoddy tribe and has served on the tribal council. He has also worked with Animal Planet on a segment called Winged Creatures, highlighting the history of the thunderbird. His life has been dedicated to working on the language and culture preservation. He has edited the Passamaquoddy Dictionary and worked to help create the Apple Passamaquoddy language app. He shares native legends through song and dance. Dwayne is currently working with the Library of Congress on translating the Passamaquoddy wax cylinders. These recordings are the first recordings in the world of native languages. They were recorded in 1890 by Jesse Walter Fuchs, who borrowed the device from the inventor Thomas Edison. Dwayne has also been involved in repatriation and land back issues. He shares historical truth regarding the Doctrine of Discovery by an indigenous perspective. As you will see momentarily, he continues to reach and pass down from one generation to another and continues to keep the language and history alive. So let's welcome Dwayne.
Thank you very much. Dwayne Lewis, Dwayne Tomah, Nujayao, Zibayig Nagare Madak Migog, Nulida has Eliud Gilwa Bejiao Lidiag Yud Bemkiskak. Kamaj Nulida has. It's very easy. In translation, I just want to say my name is Dwayne Tomah from the Passamaquoddy tribe, but also from Pleasant Point in Peter Dana Point. It's really an honor to be here today with you to share historical truth and historical knowledge, and to be able to have some dialogue as well as maybe share some historical truth respectfully. I want to say that again. I want to share historical truth respectfully. That's very important to me. Because I am not subhuman. I am Beskid Mukad, Skijin, land dweller. And it gets emotional even when I speak about it. But I'm trying to contain myself because the spirits are alive in each and every one of us as human beings. We just need to tap into those spirits. So today, I'm going to take you on a really an interesting journey today about historical truth, about secrets that have not really been told that affect each and every one of us. It just so happens it's really directly affected us because of the archaic, barbaric laws that's still being applied to all of us. So I want to share this journey with you, a historical journey, to be able to hear it from a different perspective. So I just want to share a little couple things about the film. It's very, very emotional, by the way. The individual that actually did this document has dedicated 45 years of his life unveiling this document. And his name is Stephen T. Newcomb. And a lot of his colleagues from the Haudenosaunee, the Six Nations, Iroquois Six Nations, those people have no ties with the federal government to this day because they stood fast, because they knew the deterioration of this document and how it's going to affect them. The power and domination factors that each and every one of us have been subjected to and conditioned to. So, it's not about religion, bashing. I want to be very clear about that. I want to be very respectful of people's beliefs and their religion. My job is to navigate and to educate people on the methodologies, the mindset, and the laws that are applicable today as we speak. That's my role. Because really, if I go to the hospital and you need blood, my blood, if it matches, it's the same. So the blood that runs through my veins is the same as yours. So if you need help, I will be there to bring blood. Because we're all human beings. That's the point that I'm trying to make. We're all in this together. But we've allowed the powers to take control and take our voices away from us. You're going to hear this quote in this film, and I wanted to share this quote with you about this film. It's good, you'll hear it in the film, but I wanted to start out with this particular quote from a great leader from the Shawnee Nation. His name is Tecumseh. A great leader of the Shawnee Nation. And these are his words. Love your life. Perfect your life. Beauty all things in your life. Seek to make your life long and its purpose the service of your people. Prepare a noble death song for the day you go over the great divide. Always give a word of salute when meeting or passing a friend or even a stranger. When in a loving place, when in a lonely place. Show respect to all people and grovel to none. And when you arise in the morning, give thanks for the food and for the joy of giving. If you see no reason for giving, thanks to the fault lies only with yourself. Abuse no one and nothing, for abuse turns the wise ones into fools and robs the spirit of its vision. There are two basic rules in our communities. It's been handed down for thousands of years. Rule number one, respect. Show respect. So important. Respect. Rule number two, share. Sharing. Sharing of yourselves. Sharing. Two simple rules. Very simple. And simplicity sometimes is absolutely wonderful. It really is. To keep it simple. So, I will share this film with you. Like I say, please pay attention to the language. Okay? The language that's being used in this film is so riveting, so powerful, when you take the time to read and listen to the language that's being used. Pay attention to the language that's being used. The doctrine of Christian discovery and domination, its effects on Wabanaki and other original peoples worldwide, and the reevaluation of Columbus' voyages to the Caribbean. This doctrine has formed the legal basis for taking of Wabanaki land and most lands inhabited by the original peoples of the Americas. And Africa, Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. In 2007, the United Nations condemned the doctrine of discovery in the preamble to the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. Every member of the United Nations was in support, except Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States. Join us to explore this facet of Maine in the American history and the current effects on the medieval religious concept serving as the basis for U.S. federal, Indian law, and international laws. When Christopher Columbus first set foot on the white sands of Guanahani Island, he performed a ceremony to take possession of the land for the King and Queen of Spain, acting under the international laws of Western Christendom. Although the story of Christopher Columbus' discovery has taken on mythological proportions in most of the Western world, few people are aware that this act of possession was based on a religious doctrine now known in history as the Doctrine of Discovery. Even fewer people realize that today. 5 centuries later, the United States government still uses this archaic Judeo-Christian doctrine to deny the rights of Native American Indians. Steve Newcomb, 5,000 years of injustice, the legacy of 15th century religious prejudice. Unmasking the domination code, the Doctrine of Discovery. This is really about a story of a historical truth, spirituality, and resistance told on behalf of the original nations and the people of the Great Turtle Island. And elsewhere on Mother Earth, we are still here. We are still here. And rightfully free. This film is really based on the book Pagans in the Promised Land, Decoding the Doctrine of Christian Discovery by Stephen T. Newcomb. Today in 2015, Chief Justice John Marshall's distinction between Christian people and heathens in Johnson versus Macintosh, 1823, is still treated by the U.S. Supreme Court as the valid law for the United States. The Supreme Court has used the claim to the right of Christian discovery and the domination in the Johnson ruling as its underlying rationale for every ruling that it has handed down since 1823 regarding our original nations. Christopher Columbus and other colonizers laid claim to the lands of original nations on the basis of idea that Christians had a biblical right to discover and dominate non-Christian lands. This doctrine of ancient Christendom, supported by papal edicts, continues to serve as a conceptual foundation of the political and legal systems of the United States, and as the conceptual foundation of other dominating political systems elsewhere in the world in relation to original nations. The doctrine of discovery, papal bulls, is a false claim of dominance over our lives. Let me say that again. Doctrine of discovery, papal bulls, is a false claim of domination over our lives, and a false claim of ownership of our lands. So we'll be starting the film. It's an hour film. Like I say, I certainly hope this is really brings some to light some of the stuff that's been hidden, the secrets, the historical secrets that never talked about, and how can we have a dialogue and context, respectful context and dialogue on over these issues. And we'll have some discussion over this and how can we fix this? What can we do is what I'm hearing a lot of people say. We'll talk about that. I guess we can get this started. I don't know how you do this, but I think it's
I grew up on the reservation, so my identity is I'm Northern Cheyenne, and my identity is complex because I got bussed off the reservation and went to a predominantly white school. And so I would come home and have native culture, and then I would be bussed off and be immersed in dominant culture with English language. Come home, and my dad's first language is Cheyenne. I think my identities as a Mennonite and a Northern Cheyenne, I think they always go back and forth. They're constantly conflicting and they're constantly going together. But there's a lot of similarities, especially within this psychology of peace and peacemaking and reconciliation and restorative justice. Yet at the same time, there's some conflict because within the Christian community, it's still, I would say, from my own opinion, like predominantly the thought that you are a native or a Christian. You can't really be both. And so if you want to be a Christian, you give up your native identity. I grew up in Montana, but if you think about where tribes are now on reservations, that's only a portion of the land they occupied. So we were nomadic people, and our range would have been up into Canada, down into Kansas, Minnesota, that whole little loop. We were considered a plains tribe. And so through the process of colonization, then we get pushed to this little section of land in Montana. But a lot of our sacred sites, some are in Wyoming and some are in South Dakota. And so, and even down in Denver, we had the Sand Creek Massacre. And so our sacred sites and the places in which we memorialize cover a huge area. And we also have our other relatives, the Southern Cheyenne, live in Oklahoma because we were separated during the process of termination and all that stuff.
You know, our tradition is kind of rooted in being refugees, leaving Europe to find a safe place. And my family name is Stout. The Stouts and the Orsburns migrated west, and they tried North Dakota, and then they tried Texas, and they ended up here. So I have some photographs in the house, you know, back from the early years of my family's time here. And you know, you point to it with pride, and you know, it's like, oh, we were hard stuff. We came here and settled and survived. And I took these photographs to a self-service frame shop in Seattle, and I needed help. And I asked the manager if he could help me out, and he looked at him and he goes, I have pictures like these. I go, really? Yeah, that's interesting. No. I mean, I know these people. We started comparing notes, and we're from the same valley. We had grown up together and didn't know each other. But he was the grandson of a woman who was the last native in the area to remember life before the settlers came. So she was pretty famous. And it was kind of a mystery that we didn't know each other, and we spent probably 5 hours that day just talking. But one of the things he did is he looked at that photograph and goes, he looked me in the eye and goes, your people killed my people.
European descendants benefit from a violent history of land grabbing and genocide that was justified by patriotism and religion. This same theology formed an international legal structure that continues to dispossess indigenous peoples of their land. What does it mean to be a peacemaker today, in a world where the present is defined by the violence of the past?
My grandfather, who I spent a lot of time with, and at one point he took me up to a place west of here, an area in the Tayat, and he said, yeah, we brought about 1,500 head of cattle in here, and we're going to let them rest. But then he walked to the edge of the meadow, and he pointed to some trees, and he said, and we found 2 Indians hanging from that tree. And I could tell, you know, it was serious. And I asked him why, you know. I mean, in a lot of the Western lore, we have cowboys and Indians fighting it out, but the reality of this coming from my grandfather, pointing to the tree where it happened, was a little shocking. And he said, well, you know, we're taking their land and they want it back.
In the simplest terms, the doctrine of discovery is the idea under international law that when a European Christian country was the first European to discover new lands, they had a legal right to that area.
the Doctrine of Discovery defined anybody who is not Christian as less than human and unworthy of land ownership.
The Doctrine of Discovery, as practiced, is evil. It provided that only those who know Christ are to be the chosen people. And it indicated that those who did not know Christ, who were not baptized, were heathens and had no souls and were animals. As a result of that, those heathens and animals could not own, possess, manage, or use their own indigenous lands.
There is no question that religion was a major part of the Doctrine of Discovery and justification from the European viewpoint as to why they were predominant and dominant and God intended for European Christians to have the whole world. And in the famous or infamous papal bulls in 1452 and in 1455, the Pope orders Portugal to invade, subdue the Saracen, which was their word for Muslim, and the pagan of any of whatsoever, take their property, take their lives, govern them, rule them, take. The popes created these papal bulls and started this development of the Doctrine of Discovery. But this was not a Catholic Church-specific movement. The idea of acquiring the lands and rights of indigenous peoples was very much just a European idea, and maybe greed, let's say the word outright. Queen Elizabeth I is the best example. She was an excommunicated Catholic. She authorized English expeditions to North America to attempt the first English colonies in North America. She complied with the papal bulls, even though she was no longer Catholic. And so she ordered Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Humphrey Gilbert, who were the first Englishmen authorized by the Crown to attempt colonies in what's now the United States. And I can quote you the phrase, she told them, "Go where no Christian prince has yet been, and acquire for me sovereignty, jurisdiction, and title."
And so the race was on for European monarchs to discover and claim as much of the New World as possible in the name of Christ.
Terra Nullius is also an aspect of the Doctrine of Discovery, and there's two aspects of Terra Nullius. If land was completely empty and no human lives there, when a European power arrived there, they claimed it.
But that wasn't the case when Columbus landed in what is now San Salvador. We were an estimated, in North and South America, 95 million natives. When the era of extermination by the United States of native peoples ended, we were less than 1 million people. And what happened to all of our ancestors who had a right to live here? Their rights should not have been subjugated by the Doctrine of Discovery.
But Europeans were pretty intelligent, or should I say sneaky, about interpreting the Doctrine of Discovery in their own favor. So even if there were human beings where they landed, they still said this land is terra nullius if these people are not using the land in a way European legal systems approve. If they aren't farming, if they aren't using the land to the best and highest use, then that land is terra nullius and is vacant, quote unquote, and available for claim and acquisition by a European power.
In service to the state, the European settlers had a mandate to subdue and improve the land, to make it productive by European standards.
Productive land is considered land that was arable, that was farmed, that wasn't rocky and dry and hardpan. It's the kind of soil that can be built up over years and years of good farming practices. And Mennonites were known as good farmers. For centuries, they were developing these kinds of crop rotations, and the ways that they were doing agriculture built up soil. So they were often invited in by governments in countries that wanted land reclaimed.
When we fought our Revolutionary War with England and we signed that treaty in 1783, England granted the United States all its proprietary property rights in North America, south of Canada, and east of the Mississippi. Indian peoples went either to President Jefferson and to later leaders and said, we want to become U.S. citizens. We want you to give us the fee simple titles to our lands because it's the only way to protect and keep our lands. The American politicians immediately started backpedaling. My own tribe, which was in Ohio in 1817, signed a treaty with the United States in which the treaty negotiators with our tribe made a mistake. And in the treaty it said, you will have the fee simple title to your lands. And when that treaty went to the Senate, the U.S. Senate refused to ratify it because they said, we're not going to give Indians and Indian tribes the fee simple or full ownership of their lands. And so our treaty was changed the next year in 1818 because the Congress refused to ratify that idea of giving us fee simple lands. The Doctrine of Discovery was brought into American law and jurisprudence in 1823 by our most famous Chief Justice, John Marshall. Of course, there was no Indian on either side, the plaintiff or the defendant. So it was non-Indians fighting over what used to be Indian land. The plaintiff, Mr. Johnson, his grandfather, had bought land directly from tribes that's now in the Illinois and Indiana area. Mr. Macintosh, however, had bought some of the same land from the United States, who had signed a treaty with those same tribes, and that's how the United States claimed to have acquired the land. And the United States Supreme Court said the tribes lost the ultimate title when Europeans showed up. They cannot sell their lands to whomever they wish. They can only sell their lands to the discovering European power. Even when American Indians became Christians, and even if they became civilized according to the definition of American society, it didn't really seem to change the American goal, which was to acquire all the assets of tribal peoples.
The Congressional Act of 1830, the Indian Removal Act, that was passed by Congress and signed by President Andrew Jackson. And then there were subsequent treaties in Illinois and Indiana, which really directly affected the Potawatomi who were here. And so some of the removals were forced. Well, the Trail of Death was one of those forced removals that took place and involved approximately 800 people, and there were something like 40 deaths. The removal started because the people thought they were coming into a meeting, and the meeting was going to be held in a little chapel, and they thought this is good. But then the government then proceeded to collect Potawatomi in about a 50-mile radius area. And the leaders who were in the church at the time were actually then put into a makeshift jail cell on a wagon and were led for approximately, from north central Indiana clear to Danville, Illinois. And it wasn't until they got to Danville where they were released.
So my family, my Amish ancestors came to Pennsylvania in the early 1700s and settled on indigenous land. And then about 100 years later, they moved to Ohio and settled on indigenous land that had been recently cleared by the U.S. military. And that's kind of a horrifying story.
The horrors of clearing land for European settlers became a part of U.S. government policy that attempted to destroy the culture and life ways of indigenous peoples, including decimating the buffalo population and other food sources, coercing them onto reservations, and compelling them to assimilate into the dominant culture.
I always, when I look through the different processes in which they were trying to kill the Indian, save the man, I can't believe we still retained what we have, because they tried everything, and it's genius. It's horribly genius to take little kids at a young age to boarding school and make them speak English and then make them return to their communities where they don't understand the language. And it's genius to make people poor and fight over things, and all these different processes that still keep happening, yet we still have our culture.
This is our mother's world. The birds and carols raise. The morning like a lily white declare their Maker's praise.
When we were children, we grew up, we were ordered by the government to go to Bible school. So I grew up learning a lot about the Bible. And although I didn't like being a Christian, I had to learn those things. And some things remain in your mind and your heart forever. For example, we learned that it is God's teaching through His Son that I will be with you till the end of time. And all that I have taught that is good, you are obligated to teach that to others. What is good about the doctrine of discovery? What is good about enslavement? What is good about killing other people? What is good about infanticide and genocide? God didn't teach that. The church taught that.
The church turned to Scripture to find justifications for the doctrine of discovery.
Looking at the story of the promised land. So this idea of a covenant people coming out of Exodus and being justified in taking over the land of Canaan, where the inhabitants are put to death because the covenant people have a sort of divine mandate and right to go and conquer and slaughter.
It's very important to bring it in its historical context. And it's very important also to ask the questions about power. So when we go back and read the biblical texts in their historical context, we start to recognize that these texts start to take their final form when the people of Israel were actually colonized or imperialized by the Babylonians. So when people bring in the narrative of the Hebrew Bible, without recognizing the power difference between a Christian interpreter who lives in Europe or North America and the power they possess versus the ancient Israelites who were oppressed by these other powers around them. This is where the problem starts, because people don't recognize the historical context of the text and their own historical context in which they are the powerful. And they misuse and abuse the text of the powerless to justify the acts of the powerful.
The other one is Romans 13, and a biblical text that kind of justifies, God has put in place authority, and God has given the sort of rulers on the earth are the ones who carry out the commands of God. And so through the doctrine of discovery, you see these kind of divinely sanctioned rulers and kings who are carrying out God's purposes on earth without a whole lot of question of what they're doing.
The doctrine of discovery, of course, comes out of the 15th century and was used as a vehicle for colonization. But it's part of a pattern that goes back really to the very beginning of writing itself, both in the Bible and in texts outside the Bible. Well, I refer to this as this pattern of the religion of empire and the religion of creation. In the religion of empire, God is understood as a force that exists primarily in the civilized context, so in the city. So you look at ancient empires and they had a royal palace and a temple for their god, usually connected. And the connection highlights that the god is there to justify the king and the king's authority over the people. The king is often understood as in the place of the god, or even in some traditions as the god itself. What I also want to contrast is the way that Jesus took up a tradition that existed throughout the entire Hebrew Bible that I call the religion of creation, which is the exact opposite. So that's a tradition that instead of arising out of the city, arises out of people's relationship with the earth itself, and sees all people as part of a common human family. So biblically speaking, we could look to Genesis 1, and they're created in harmony with an earth which is also considered good. So these two paradigms of religion of empire and religion of creation battle throughout all of history. Jesus clearly sides with the religion of creation against the religion of empire. So, for example, he does not support the Jerusalem temple as the place where God is. He leads his disciples up a mountain to experience God. He experiences God in the wilderness or in the river.
The third theological justification behind the doctrine of discovery coming out of the papal bulls, and you see this in Manifest Destiny as well as the Great Commission. So Matthew 28 is when Jesus sends out his disciples and says, "Go therefore into all the world, make disciples of all nations."
My Christian theology centers around Jesus Christ, who accompanied the powerless and the oppressed. Jesus, who died an unjust death, but was raised from the dead, vindicated and justified by God, shows us that our calling as Christians is to actually serve others rather than dominate them.
More recently, I started connecting that to the way I grew up and realized I lived the doctrine of discovery. Like my whole reality on the reservation is a result of the doctrine of discovery.
The impacts of the doctrine of discovery are very real today and continue to disempower indigenous peoples. They face pressure to concede to resource extraction that threatens their very existence, even on reservation lands.
They're running out of surface level coal in the coal mine, and so we live on a rich deposit of coal, which is like surface level, like the easy to get to stuff that's good. And so they're constantly trying to hit us up with putting railways through and different things like that, and extracting our resources, our timber, which would affect, the mining would affect our aquifers, and they wanted to do some fracking and some coal bed methane extraction. And so far, none of that has happened. But they're constantly asking, and yeah, but it's a constant battle because people still need to eat. People need water, your basic needs. And if someone offers you money, it's almost, what do you do?
Resource extraction, especially mining, decimates the land and makes it uninhabitable. This is happening around the world as economic development displaces indigenous peoples while benefiting outsiders. A prime example is occurring now in Suriname, South America.
So Suriname was settled by the Dutch, and when Suriname declared independence from the Netherlands, the ownership of all of that land was transferred from the government of the Netherlands to the government of Suriname. And so the state, the national governing body in Suriname, owns title to all of the land. And that transfer took place as a direct result of the doctrine of discovery. So as technology has improved and it's gotten easier and less expensive to go deeper and deeper into the rainforest, the desire to be enriched by that resource has grown, and that includes logging, taking gold out of the soil, mining for bauxite and other minerals.
Used in gold mining, mercury is a known neurotoxin that causes serious health problems and even death. Mercury travels through the food chain and even upstream to communities far from gold mining.
Pemide go to manote ete. Tok mi abi kwek mi edesi alaski. Wa American go dape anga tourisme. E sorry mi ataki awani loko siki sani. Aini miskin. Datere mitaki anga disi American. Anong mi wawang loko miskin. Mi foluko abiete. Kane anong mi foluko awani sikitu.
The Wayana people of Apatina, Suriname collected samples of their own hair to test for mercury. They found that every single person tested had unsafe levels of mercury, and many were dangerously high.
My name is Joan van der Bos. My first name is Joan. Mina solek fa usabi lanti sap mina eerste uma kapten fuser nan in de ingi dorpu. Desma fuja so elip fu prani, visi, onti. Ja, na de dupti landbouw, na dat na de libi. Over agrontori mi wan taki. Ade wan bigi sari gimi. Ef mi musluku va umbusi Lanti ne hori kaninitins na nga uno a overhead. Tak mo betrek eerst den smasa dena in de buurt voor a busi dat sami si tak vrij kom go accident even. If de gebruik a busi dat. Maar zonder inspraak voor uno gewoon den schrift den besluit. Begin gisma beschikking na bakasi. En op sanina regering voor disi, op sanina regering voor jaren 70. Zonder medeweten voor het dorp, presi ay prati. En te a prati, dat de tego next to na teo si bepaalde sansa de man e begin do. Dat tego erna, dat je erachter dat je si, oh, a presi prati. En wie speel go klop, dat hij tak nee, volgens de grondwet. Te was makis papieren, akis beschikking tapagrong, dat je ano a rechthebbende, sa je go actie a presi baka, iwana presi baka, dat je in strijd met de wet. Dat meer actie misref nu, pe onrechte delik ingi.
Within this legal structure, international development, economic arrangements, economic treaties, they're based in the assumption that some people have the right to own and control territories and lands and other people do not.
Kawisay agaw kun sa kayo amin. A pleasant day to all of you. I am Pia Making Malayaw, and I am an indigenous Bontoc Igorot from the Mountain Province, which is in northern Philippines. I am part of CAMP. It is a National Alliance of Indigenous Peoples organization here in our country. The Spanish colonizers imposed the Regalian Doctrine. This is similar, if not the same, to the General Doctrine of Discovery, which also declared the entire Philippines as owned by the King of Spain. Where during the post-colonial government, the Regalian Doctrine was retained. The Philippine Constitution declares that all resources in our lands, in the Philippine territory, are owned by the state. So if we would look at the issue of mining, with liberalized mining institutionalized by the Mining Act of 1995, which practically allows for up to 100% foreign ownership of our mineral resources and our mineral lands, actually poses the biggest threat currently to our rights to ancestral land.
But there's hope when Indigenous people hold the title to their ancestral lands.
I lived in the Philippines with a host family of Indigenous people who were Ikalahan Kalangoya was the name of the tribe. You could see the outlines of the ancestral domain, like the literal borders of it by the forested area, and all around it was like logged, and all around the outside lots of erosion and landslides. But the ancestral domain, because the Indigenous peoples there had gotten a secure land tenure agreement, the Ikalahan Kalangoya were able to protect their forests, and I began to see kind of the importance of land title for Indigenous people.
There is international recognition that Indigenous peoples should have rights to their lands, but change is slow. In 2007, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. However, while this was a major milestone, the declaration is not universal law. Rather, it is merely suggestions for countries to put into law. Not surprisingly, only a few countries have implemented these recommendations. For most Indigenous people, this document is simply a piece of paper. It hasn't resulted in titles of their ancestral lands.
As a scientist myself, not only am I a rancher, but I'm a toxicologist. And as I start entering into conversations about the issues and the causes and move out of the technical field, it's almost impossible to introduce the language of morality. What happens? As a scientist, if I talk about values, my work is diminished. If an economist talks about values, their work is diminished. It's considered biased. If a politician, deals with these, he's got this big, they have these different accountabilities they have to deal with. Everybody is paralyzed and incapable of engaging in topics of morality, of right and wrong. The only community of people on Earth today that can deal with these structural issues that are global in scale is the ecumenical community. And my question is, where are they?
Every white settler ought to know about where I live. Whose land was this before colonization? How did they lose it? By what mechanism and when? And where are their descendants today? Now that last question opens up a whole range of possibilities for relationship. If their descendants are still alive somewhere today, I could find out how they felt about this land, how they felt about losing it. How are things going for them today?
And Rich's, one of his drives and concerns is that he and others are living in northern Indiana on what once was Potawatomi turf.
What needs to be returned to its rightful owner, what needs to be restored. I think that this is a really scary one for Mennonites, a scary one for me to think of, not knowing really what that might look like.
But visiting the past is very difficult. It's very painful. And for the two groups that are involved, visiting the past brings two emotions that I think are very important to address. Visiting the past is painful for those who have been oppressed because it reminds them of how their ancestors were dispossessed of the land. It reminds them also of their present, that they feel like they are caught in this cycle of oppression and there is no way out of it. Visiting the past for those who come from a European descent can be painful as it recalls this emotion of shame. And they think it is difficult to visit the past because they don't want to deal with this shame. So as we seek liberation and reconciliation between the different communities that live here in North America, and as we long to empower those who are marginalized, we need to talk about the pain and the suffering, and we need to talk about the fear of being ashamed.
Yeah, you may get comments like, your people killed my people. It's like, yeah, I think I understand that. But you can carry on the conversation. And you can, on one hand, be in good relationship with the people you know, but on the other hand, we have to acknowledge that these structures are still in place and they're still happening. And it's not okay to go, I'm a good person. And within my community, I'm doing well, and within the people I know, I treat with respect. No, we have to become more than the quiet on the land.
I'd like to think I had the answers, but I don't. But I want to be in dialogue with other people and to listen, to learn from each other. I believe that we as a church can, through that process, then make decisions that will change and affect our attitudes and actions that we have with people here in North America, as well as people in other parts of the world. The result is really carrying out our commitment to being people who act with peace and justice as a primary purpose. And by doing that, we enact part of God's righteousness, which is putting things to right, even though we don't know what those are like at the moment.
There's so much wisdom of indigenous people that we desperately need. We might not realize how desperate the need is yet. We might be under the illusion that our Western mentality of that technology will solve all ills will fix things, but it will not restore us to a relationship with the earth that's healthy, to the whole life way of indigenous peoples.
And mi wantak unus mus bapalu ontwikkeling tras mafudoro se muskong tak ya soansan wan dunin dorp en imus de ins na unus refilek ingi muskonin overleg tak ya uloba ontwikkeling dati dan pas we stem tuma anos mafudoro se muskona tak ya if they can go to ja of art only wat dan ook of boxit na unulek inheemse bestuur of inheemse leiders moest kunnen tafara da taki. Samen na een bevolking, een inspraak voor bevolking. En voor de eens of niet, dan pas lanti ukan tegi lanti sa uwani, dan pas akan te kwam beslissen, maar anom teken tape eentje uno wana sandat.
And I hope that you can join us in our campaign to stop the killings of indigenous peoples and to immediately repeal the operational plan Bayanihan, which is in disguise of peace and development, which actually is still continuing to violate the civil and political rights of the indigenous peoples, which is very linked to the economic interest in our ancestral lands.
The moment you meet the children or the elderly or the people in these communities that are suffering, once you know them, you are obligated to do something. There is no turning back. It's not enough to wait for your heart to change. You have to change it and act.
But let me frame this in a question. Would it have been enough to say that slavery was not a doctrine of Christ and that spiritually we needed to align ourselves in some repudiation statement and say that we do not believe in slavery? Is that enough? Is it good enough to stop there? To just say, well, we know that it's not a doctrine of Christ. At some point, you also have to do away with that structure. You have to do away with the legal arrangement that makes it possible for one human being to own another. And the church was very involved in overcoming that structure. The Doctrine of Discovery is the same. We have a legal arrangement where certain peoples have inherited the right to dominate and own land, and other peoples do not have those rights.
How can Indigenous people be heard as they ask for the rights they justly deserve? We, who live with power and privilege, can stand beside them and speak out. We can ask for the social change that is so desperately needed.
Churches are powerful, whether they want to be or not. And we can do our own part as Native people, but it's like we still need these organizations, and churches are systems, they're all over the U.S., they're global.
And global action is needed. We know that land theft and resource extraction is happening in our neighborhoods and around the world. Our planet is being exploited and pillaged for economic development. It is time to act in solidarity with those who are the brunt of these actions, the indigenous peoples of the world.
I actually have to be part of working side by side with indigenous communities as they imagine a world in which they have rights and to struggle with them as they seek those rights. And I'm participating in that.
Sarah Augustine and Doug Hostetler spoke on behalf of the Wayana people at the Organization of American States Commission on Human Rights.
Doug Hostetler will present to you next a photo essay that he has created from his time on the Human Rights Delegation in 2011 when he accompanied Suriname Indigenous Health Fund to the interior of Suriname. He is the director of the Mennonite Central Committee, United Nations Office.
In one generation, a mining of gold has poisoned and polluted the rivers and destroyed their ability to earn, to be able to survive on those rivers. I hope that you act before it is too late. I thank you.
I just want to ask you and plead with you to consider the recommendations that we've made in our request to advocate for the survival of the Wayana people.
Love is about caring for your brothers and sisters, your community, and majority of the people in your society. Love will flourish not just by ending the militarization of our communities, nor by the simple absence of violence. It is in our search for social justice and genuine recognition of our collective rights to ancestral land and self-determination that we find and develop love.
So my hope is that people of faith, especially people of faith like myself, who have a story of being white settlers, and what I mean by that is, our ancestors came to this country and settled on land that had been indigenous land, native land. I hope that we can use those stories and not get paralyzed by them, but use those stories to fuel our action for social justice right now. What does it mean for me now to have benefited from the wealth and security that my family enjoyed as a result of having that land and farming on it for decades? What does it mean for me to take that privilege and now use it to stand alongside people who are being dispossessed of their land right now? So that's the thing. Colonization is happening right now. And there's people right now who need others to come along beside them and help them in their fight for justice.
And I have a lot of hope in Mennonites because Mennonites consider themselves of the land as well. And there's a lot of farmers. And if anyone in the world is going to feel the connection to the land beyond Indigenous people, I feel like that is a point of connection because they seem to love the land as well. And so I have a lot of hope there, and I just want Mennonites to find that hope and to not get scared of these stories of the railroads coming in and pushing natives off, and then the next immediate population to come in are usually the Mennonites. Because they are considered the peaceful of the land, but not to get scared of that, like move beyond that, to get involved in any way you can, whether it's just personally or in your own little family or teaching your kids differently, or just to be encouraged and find ways of being involved and staying involved.
Because I think what was done in the name of Christ, the Doctrine of Discovery was done in the name of Christ, needs to be undone in the name of Christ.
This type of system, it's really affected the Penobscot people. It's affected Indigenous peoples. If you think about the Penobscot peoples in that case, this is the Penobscot River, named after the people. And then all of a sudden, they have no rights on that river. Cannot continue their lifestyle, their connection to the land, their authority. You can't blame the salmon. You can't blame the animals and how this system is affecting our environment. It all ties in. Just recently, we just returned 110 of our ancestors to the earth. You don't hear about that in the media. These are hidden secrets in society about power and domination. Just so you know, we just returned them about a week ago, and our ancestors were dug up along East Coast, Vinyl Haven, all these different towns, different areas, Blue Hill, and they were placed in museums for study. 6,500-year-old ancestors. They were in boxes, all tags identified. So this is the challenges that we are faced with right here. These are the challenges. We would never, ever think about taking anyone's body and study it. It's just not acceptable in our territory. It just is not. Respect. Respect. Sharing. Basic principles. So thank you very much for taking the time to share some of this knowledge, and I'm glad that I'm able to take this time to share some of this knowledge, and to kind of educate the people on the challenges that we all are facing. I know you've been sitting here for quite some time, and I want to go over the wax cylinders briefly with you. I know it's been a long day, but I'd love to answer questions if I can, to be able to maybe clarify some things, or if there's any questions. If not, we could also go right on to the things, but I'd like to have some discussion if anybody would like to care to ask any questions.
You see this doctrine of Christian domination in today's politics in America?
Very good question. If you think about context for a moment, it's alive. This document is alive and well in society. People don't even realize this effects of this document. It affects all of us, each and every one of us. If you think about the protections of the federal government, we don't have the same protections, the tribe, as other native people, because of the Land Claim Settlement Act. But see, that was systematically designed that way. Systematically designed that way. Nobody wants to talk about genocide. Nobody wants to talk about systemic racism. It's very shameful. But how do we talk about those issues in its context? To be respectful, to have that type of dialogue, and to be able to hold our public officials accountable to this archaic, barbaric system.
So, in the news today, Senator Troy Jackson and Governor Mills, some discussion about the Indian land rights negotiation that Maine has and how that excludes somehow from federal rights that other tribes have. Could you explain that?
Well, that really is a way of alienating, and also the resources that we have, they're not protected. They don't have the protections of federal government. That was the reason why they did it. I mean, because the government intervened in this settlement. The Maine Indian Land Claim Settlement Act, they intervened. It was a violation. This is unceded territory. People don't realize that. Unceded territory.
So, do the Penobscot claim the rights to the river, the water, and that passes through their lands?
Yes.
Isn't that what the controversy is?
Exactly. Because the constant pollution, the contamination of the fish and the waterways, I mean, it really is consistent with this whole document. This is the legal foundation on which they operate on, and the legal basis of their decisions.
I just want to tell everybody a little story that happened in Connecticut
Uh-huh.
on the Thames River. Fort Trumbull was built probably prior to the Civil War, but anyways, it was in the early 1900s. A lot of Caribs moved into, well, I'm from Connecticut, moved into that area. My grandmother being one of them. And just recently, in 2010, the Supreme Court gave a commercial company eminent domain to kick everybody out of that area. Sits right on the river, probably a couple hundred acres. And they were going to build a big convention center and gambling casino, which they thought would revitalize New England. And in the end, the Supreme Court said, yeah, you can take their land. And that all happened, and then there wasn't enough money, it all fell through, so there's a couple guys with some very nice property.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, that comes down to Johnson versus Macintosh, and I want to elaborate a little bit on that. That was a very, very, a very important ruling on behalf of domination. Johnson versus Macintosh is really real clear as to we do not have title to lands. I don't know if anybody understands that. It's very clear. We, as indigenous people, on these concentration camps that they put us on, because that's really what they are, they're concentration camps. Nobody wants to say that, but it's really what it is. So, being placed on these concentration camps, we do not have a title to these lands. We only have a right to occupy. A clear distinction between title and a right to occupy. That's a clear distinction. So I just want to make that real clear that we don't own any land, per se. We only have a right to occupy. The lands that I live on now in Perry, which is 10 acres, I eventually will have a title to that land. Eventually. So these are the type of challenges that we're faced with. And then you may ask yourself, what can we do? Very good question. Because I've been asked that a lot. What can we do? Number one, tell the truth. Tell the truth. Take responsibility. Let's move on. Take accountability. Just be truthful, respectful. Get a hold of your legislators, your congressmen. Place pressure on them. Because that's where it needs to start. They are the decision makers. Place a lot of pressure on them. Get involved. Educate yourselves on this document. If there's anything in here that I say, if you don't believe me, do your own research. Do your own research. This has been really, a lot of time and effort has really been put into this document. And as you well know, the Santa Maria just came up Bucksport. I try to go there to educate them. I brought this document there. I got a hold of the person with the Santa Maria, the captain, and also the town manager, and I asked, what can I do to come? Can I come and educate, to share some historical truth in its context, and to be able to reach out to you, to be able to share some historical knowledge? So I was able to actually do that, and I was very, very happy. The people embraced me there. I was on the ground talking with the people, tried to educate them, and it was really, really well received. Matter of fact, I received a call from Stephen T. Newcomb, and he called me, and he says, Dwayne, how did you do that? So I was very, very happy, by the way, of sharing with him how it actually took place. So it was really nice to be able to do that and to be able to share some of that stuff. But on another note, we'll go on to the real brief, and I know it's been a long day, but have another question.
I just have a question. First of all, thank you for enlightening us. And I'd like to know how people could get a hold of the movie at some point. It would be good.
Sure.
But what is the legal definition of a right to occupy? What the hell does that mean?
Well, a right to occupy is basically that. All it is just you do not have a legal title to this land. Okay? Like you have a title to your land. Okay? You have a legal document that says this is mine. We don't have that. The United States government can come in and just say it's no longer yours.
They can take away the right to occupy?
Of course they can.
So how do you get there? I mean, do you have to buy?
We've purchased land. Yes, we've purchased land back. We've purchased land back. But what we have to do is it has protections from the federal government to protect it, but we only have a right to occupy. But if they decide one day, hey, see you later. Not that I would see that happening, but it could happen.
People in Connecticut all had deeds.
Yeah. Yeah.
They had to leave.
Yeah, of course they would. But anyway, also another point that I wanted to make too is it's really important that we remember that these congressional medals of honor that are still these people still have these medals of honor at this massacre at Wounded Knee. Okay, so it's really important for us to rescind those at some point, to send the message, this is unacceptable, and it's wrong. As well as this document here. It's wrong. We all know it's wrong. What can we do to come together to make it better for all of us as human beings, instead of separating us all the time in these colors? But anyway, I want to just get on to the wax cylinders real quick, just to kind of give you an idea of what, I know it's been a long day, like I said. These wax cylinders are just to give you an idea and history on these wax cylinders. Okay? First of all, anybody know what a wax cylinders are? This is actually a sleeve of a wax cylinder from Thomas Edison's wax cylinder. Okay, this is a sleeve. And in 1890, a gentleman by the name of Jesse Walter Fuchs came to Calais, Maine. And at that time, it was really, really a point in history where a lot of stuff was being lost. Languages, people, lands, everything. So they really wanted to document these things because they really thought that we were going to be gone. Wiped out totally. So Thomas Edison has this wax cylinder machine, and so we were actually the first people in the world to be recorded. So Jesse Walter Fuchs comes to Calais, Maine, records us, and really documents a lot of these songs and stories. And my job is to, and I've had the honor and privilege of transcribing these songs and stories because of my fluency and my connection to the culture, and to be able to really see what's the content. What are these saying? So it's really, really powerful. Took me down this journey of understanding a lot more about history, as well as cultural components, as well as language components, and as well as how emotional I got actually when I first listened to the wax cylinders. So it's really powerful, it's riveting. So I wanted to share with you the first field recording the Passamaquoddies ever got recorded. And this is actually what they actually first listened to. So if you could imagine 130 years ago, you're being recorded, you can hear your voice. What the heck is that? Right? What? Are you serious? A listening device? I could actually hear my own voice? Are these people crazy? If you think about that, you can imagine what the mind was thinking if you actually witness this. So this is actually the first recording. Let me get here it is. This is so you can hear better. Okay, so this is actually the first recording the Passamaquoddy people actually heard. Sorry about that, that was the wrong cylinder. I could tell right off. For some reason my speaker's not picking it up, but...
Now, Mr. Phonograph, let's try it again. The other cylinder which I had talked back at me and threatened me a good deal so that I didn't dare to go on. Tonight, a gentleman from the Passamaquoddy tribe has come over to see you and to hear the songs which were sung by Peter Selmore and Noel Joseph and some of the stories which they told. I am very glad to say that you recorded the stories which I obtained at Calais about a year ago so nicely that he is able to understand them, and I think that shows that the phonograph can keep these stories for a very long time. Now the phonograph is a talking machine. It was invented by Tomah Alva Edison, a native of New York. You can talk into it as much as you like, or you can as liberally as you choose. In either case, it reproduces exactly what you said. Now, Mr. Phonograph, let us hear what I recorded on the phonograph in order that we can see what you can do in English. I know you will do pretty well. Goodbye, Mr. Phonograph.
So those are the kind of things that, you can imagine what they were thinking at that time to hear their voices, you know what I mean, on this particular phonograph. And the next song that I want to share with you is really about gathering, coming together as people. And this song is called At Huzuswe Wagan. And At Huzuswe Wagan is a snake dance song and ceremony. So this particular song is about unity, about coming together as people, to come to solve common problems, celebrate, inaugurate each other's chief, have ceremonies. It was always the beginning of a ceremony to bring everybody together to eat. So this, you'll hear this particular one, and it's the snake dance one. If I get the right one. Here it is. Whenever we were going to get together, whenever we'd vote, inaugurate each other's chiefs. Whenever we would dance, there would be food cooking. Whenever the food was finished and done, it just started to get dark. Got done eating, we finished eating, so we started to dance. So we'd go in this place, and we'd go like this, like a snake, and we'd do the snake dance. And then we'd, just like the snake dance, and we would come together with our Micmac friends, and we would sing. So what they would do is they would take a rattle. It was always used, a horn rattle, whenever they did this ceremony.
Is that what we're hearing in the
Yes, it's a rattle. What happens is, right, is it's all about balance. It's about balance. So it would have a man, woman, woman. And they would hold each other's hands together. And they would do these dances. We huyane, we ha, yone ha, yone ha, yone ha, yone ha. These are all ceremonies that we would do to honor each other, to honor the earth, honor everyone. And if you notice, the women, when they're dancing, okay, you'll notice the women, there's a distinct difference between the women and the men. The women are like this. What they're doing is they're caressing her. They're caressing our mother. That's the connection. Honoring her. That's what they do. They're honoring her, showing her respect. These are part of the ceremonies and our connection to our mother, our connection to each other, our connection to the land, our connection to the trees, our connection to the insects, to the children. These are all part of the ceremonies and basic instructions of our people. Because we're inclusive. We all matter. All of us. Society has totally divided us. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. How do we come together? Communicate, building relationships, friendships, and holding them to that. Your word is your word. Your word is your word. That's what it's about right there. Okay? Okay? It's not sign this document. Okay? Because that's saying, I don't trust you. But that's the idea and what we've been subjected to. So anyway, those are the type of things, the ceremonies that we talk about. Inclusiveness. Coming together as people. And these are ceremonies that have been handed down for thousands of years. What a wonderful system. What a wonderful system. But because of these documents, okay, we're not acknowledged. We're not acknowledged. No respect. They're, I guess you could say, they're not around. They're not visible. They don't matter. That's what we need to stop in society against each other, because we all matter. So these are the type of ceremonies that I want to share with you, coming together. I'm going to share one more cylinder with you, and I know it's been a long day, but I want to share this very, very important cylinder. And this cylinder is very, very important to our people. Okay? And it's about, we all can identify with this. Okay, this cylinder is called, first of all, let me share this with you. Jesse Walter Fuchs, when he labeled these, okay, really didn't understand the language, okay, which is understandable. Okay, so he didn't label them correctly. So once I was able to listen to the wax cylinders, I was able to identify the mislabeling and the misinformation that he thought he knew. But because of a language speaker, I was able to identify these things over time. So this one here is it's called a death song, and very, very important in our territory, because number one, when a chief died, other territories would select their chief for that particular tribe. So Pleasant Point, if somebody died in Pleasant Point, we would not select our own chief. Other territories would select them. We wouldn't do it. They all would do it. Okay? That's important. Takes all the political BS, so to speak, out of the equation. Okay? So those are the type of things that are very near and dear to our people. So when a chief would die, a flagpole was cut down. The flagpole was cut down and burnt with all his stuff. His bows, his arrows, his tomahawks, his flag was buried with him. And they would mourn him for a year. 1 year they would mourn him. After the Bedwuzimug. Bedwuzimug means inauguration of another person or selection of another person. So they would be summoned by the tribe to elect a new chief. And the other tribes, the other members of the tribe, would select them according to the common law of allied nations. Common law of allied nations. Powerful. It was common. Respect. Back to respect. So, and then he'd chosen by a general wigwam. And according to the council, the leading men had assembled 4 of their 6 canoes, and they would dispatch them. They would dispatch them to the nearby territories. They call it a ginwak dosid, which is a messenger. And they would be in the canoe, and they would have this flag in the front as they're going up the river. Everybody on the river, when they were working, doing things, everybody, they'd stop and watch the canoe going up the river. Everybody would stop in respect because they knew that something had happened to one of the chiefs or one of the tribal members as he's going by. His job was to go up there to inform the Mi'kmaq people. Mi'kmaq. Ginwat Darsid went to go up to the Mi'kmaq people. Now, Ginwat to Mi'kmaq, Elimachined Zogam. In other words, he'd go up there to tell them that the chief had perished. And up Stebes in the Widnig, then he would get in his canoe and start paddling to the Maliseet Nation. Now, Ginwat to Wolastawig, Elimachined Zogam. Then he would tell them the chief had perished. Up Stebes in the Widnig, Nagana Ginwat to one. Panuapskewik. Inform the Penobscot people. And then they go and inform Pescademukadi, Passamaquoddy people. And they would all come down the river together as one unit to pay respect. Always respect. So important. Respect. So they would come down. And as they arrived, this is what they would sing, a very archaic song that they would sing. And it's part of this wax cylinder. As they arrive, they would say, Uzugu, Elmi Zugu, Zubekwigaglana, Elmi Wichinlu, Yute Yupen, Henuya, Yute Yupen, Henuya. He was just here. He was just here. We're paddling together down the river. He was just here. So when they would arrive, they would sing that song. And the community would welcome them, all of them, into the village. And they would sing another very archaic song. And it goes like this. Eguanode, Eguanode, Guanode. Eguanode is welcoming you. Welcome you to our village. They would bring everybody in. They would feed everybody. And everybody would be there for each other and mourn the loss of the chief. And to talk about what we can do to make it better. And the selection process. So that's all part of customs and traditions of our people that normally would have been lost if it wasn't for these wax cylinders. And the research, the extensive research that we've been able to do orally from our villages, because there are still people in our village that remember some of these songs. It's amazing. So I know it's been a long day, and I want to thank each and every one of you. I want to thank you for having me here, and all of you for having me here. I really appreciate the time that we've spent today. I certainly hope it has give you an idea of the challenges that we're faced in society, and also the fact that we are still here and we still embrace you. And I'm still here to embrace each and every one of you, regardless of what happened. What can we do today to make a difference? So that's just how I feel, and that's basic instructions from our people. It's been handed down for thousands of years to welcome you. It hasn't changed. and it will not change. How can we coexist? And also acknowledging that we are a nation within a nation. So we can coexist. There's no question in my mind. We have been good stewards of this land for thousands of years, and we certainly can't blame the fish. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you so much. Anybody don't know, I'm Walter, Dwayne's brother. I seen the Doctrine of Discovery the first time. Well, I listened to it when he went to Belfast. And well, we didn't have the screen, so we heard it, we listened to it, and seeing it and hearing it is two different things, because I didn't get the feelings that I had watching this and seeing it with my own two eyes. And just talk about it, I'm not getting swelled up now. And I saw myself as I was watching myself and seeing it with my own two eyes. I mean, I watered, and I'm like, oh my, you know what I mean? That didn't happen when I was there, because listening to it, there's two different things you see. And Dad, be proud of you, bro. Thank you. What you're doing, I appreciate you. Thank you. The other component to that, what my brother was saying, is also living it. Okay, when you live it, it's really difficult to sort of share that with you, share some of those sentiments. It's very difficult when you live it. So, and living in those challenges is very, very difficult. So, as some of my colleagues have said in the film, you know, you really have to humble yourself. It really comes down to that. I am a human being. I have emotions too. I go through those same emotions. So it's really about humbling myself and educating people.
Question. Within the different tribes, if one tribe member intentionally or unintentionally wandered into another tribe member's area, were they welcomed with open arms or were they killed?
Well, it would depend on the context, depending on the situation. You know, we really respectively knew our boundaries, and we respected our boundaries. And that's the other aspect of traditional cultural teachings, is that we have to act like animals sometimes. If you look at the animal world, they respect each other's territories to a certain extent.
Well, I guess I'm wondering if that mentality is different than the conquistadors or whatever they were. They came in and took over, killed, warred, headquarters, whatever. How that's different.
Yeah, it's very, very complex, I got to say, as far as understanding human behavior sometimes.
I would add to that and say the attitude was, I think, if a native person went into someone else's territory, you're looking at that person as an equal but perhaps an enemy, perhaps depending on your history with each other, as opposed to Europeans coming, and you were not really seen as human. You were seen as beasts, you were seen as less than. I think that really is a really profound difference. And honestly, that framework that you just gave us, suddenly it's like now things make sense to me. Nothing made sense to me. Like, why is this still happening? I can't believe.
Good for you. Good for you for identifying that. Good for you. Well, you know, it's really about the language that's being used too. You got to really think about all the language that's being used. If you think about the language that's being used, let me give you an example. Reconciliation. If you really look at that word and break it down and its origin, it really comes down to the same philosophies that we're talking about here, about power and domination. Come into our realm and we'll fix you. That's what's going on. Come in here. We know the answers for you. Power and control. Same thing we're all been subjected to. We don't even realize it. So they play this dance, you know, want your votes. You know, it's just a big game. Money game.
We started with, talked about respect and sharing.
Yeah.
So what a different outcome. You know?
Yeah.
That's the story that was taught about the pilgrims. So
yeah.
Question about the film. I've traveled all over South America and Mexico, and
Sure.
maybe I go to the Inca ruins.
Sure.
If there's one nearby.
Uh-huh.
And I've always just kind of mystery of whatever happened to the Incas.
Uh-huh.
Is this film saying that the Spaniards came in and wiped out all the Incas? Because I never, you know, when I was told in those places, I never heard that was what happened.
Yeah, it's
kind of faded away.
Yeah, it's a combination, really. You know, the genocidal acts. You know, I mean, it's consistent with this type of philosophy and mindset. It's all consistent. It's all the, you know, the people that were ruling at that time and their methods that they used was to really extinguish and to exterminate non-believers. That's really the principles and laws that are being even applied today as we speak. As you notice, Ruth Ginsburg had to make a ruling on this particular subject, and she referred back to 1823, Johnson versus Macintosh, in some of those rulings. So it's real clear about the domination factor and also the laws that are very archaic and barbaric, really. So really, it's what it comes down to is that same methodology of we're in power. Yeah. Not you, the people. We are. That's the bottom line. And the environment? Heck with the environment. Who cares about the environment? It's really what it's coming down to. So these big corporate companies, that's the cause of it all. And our state of governor, no disrespect, but she really is following suit with them. Because she's in bed with them. It's that simple.
What I appreciated, I remember from elementary school, 1492, almost sailed the ocean blue. But, you know, sometimes what that has to do with me here in New England.
Yeah.
But you talked about, I had to take notes, John Cabot. So the English had the same domineering mindset, the same sense of entitlement and rights. And
exactly.
They used the king and their religion to justify. Basically, one and the same came across a different latitude.
Exactly.
About the same period of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's so important, you know, about respect. You know, I think it's, and to be able, that's why I come here, you know, to embrace you and to talk to you and really, you know, see what you can do to help us. You know, we really need help. You know, and when you help us, you're helping yourselves as well, because it all affects us. It really does. It affects each and every one of us. So, you know, we're free and independent people. We've always been that way. Unceded territory. Free and independent people. Always been that way. It's the way it's always been. Because of our connection to the land. Our spiritual connection. We live in harmony with the land. Our language is lost because of these systems. Healthcare. I mean, where do you want to go with this, right? As far as the devastations, the implications of this. It's very, very deep. And we're only here for a short time. So we have to pass it on to that little one there. This information. Made me smile seeing that little kid in here. Okay, you really did. Made me very smile because, see, even the little girl that was sitting there, listening, even though it was devastating when she came in, when we started going in on all this other stuff, I was like, oh my God. What? But
doing the same thing.
I was, believe me, I was fringing when that was happening, but I think it's so important to have some context and dialogue with them after and explain to them, what that's about, so that way they get an understanding, of what this is all about in the context.
Is your DVD still in there?
Yeah, it is.
I just want to say it's sort of pretty clear in what you presented who the savages were.
Mm-hmm.
Really.
Yeah.
You think about that. And
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's just this fundamental dishonesty about the whole enterprise when you bring religion in and say that this is sanctified behavior. That's really dishonest. If they were saying, look, we're greedy mothers, we want to take what you have, that would be one thing. But if you do it with this layer of, spirituality on top of it, that's fundamentally dishonest. There's no honesty in it.
You got it.
So that's very valuable.
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you very much. Like I say, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate each and every one of you for showing up.